Hey guys, I'm in Charleston, South Carolina, and I'm going to do a story here that's, I think, powerful. It relates to today, it relates to the past. I want to tell you because of how history affects us today. So I'm standing in front of an old slave mart here, and it was literally, as you can tell in the back, called a mart. It was Ryan's Mart. It was open from 1856 to 1863, just 7 years. They moved it indoors in those years, and that's why you see it behind me now. Because in Charleston, which was a major slave port, probably the most major slave port in America, they used to sell the slaves out in the street until it became a little uncouth, and a genteel society was uncomfortable that they were trading the slaves right out in the street, so they had to move it indoors, and that's why this mart was created in 1856. Now, I'm going to tell you about some of the horrible things that happened here, because we have to learn from it. And remember, Charleston, South Carolina is where the Dylan Roof shooting happened and the Walter Scott shooting. So that history is still with us to some degree. So first off, I want to tell you folks that, of course, this has to do with race, but it also doesn't. So let me explain that, and then give you the background of what actually happened. So, some folks who want to excuse slavery will say, "Oh, but Africans in Africa also participated in the slave trade," and the answer to that is, of course they did. And slavery is not about white and black in that sense. It's about human nature, and that's why we have to guard against the ugly side of human nature. And if we could make money off of it, God knows what humans will do, right? And so, so the Africans did participate. In fact, a lot of people think most of the black people in this country were slaves at one point. That is true. Then they think most of the white people in this country owned slaves. That is not true. Did you know that 95% of the slaves were owned by just 3% of the white population? And it's true that some freed blacks also then went on to own slaves. So not all of them did, most of them did. But some who were freed stayed in places like Charleston and wound up taking slaves of their own. So I just want you to have that piece of context. It's not about blaming anybody, and that is the reality of what happened here. It's about learning from it. So let me tell you about three unfortunately horrific parts of it, so that we could all learn from the mistakes of the past. So one is about women, and not a lot of people talk about the horrible sexual abuse of slavery, right, that happened during slavery, because it's very uncomfortable. But there's an exhibit in there, and now it's a museum, of course, where they show how women would be flogged or whipped in the public square. And there was two primary reasons why they would. One is if they ignored work orders or did not follow them as instructed. The other is if they refused sexual demands. And they would be whipped in public for two reasons. One, to let everybody know you must not ignore either work orders or sexual demands. And number two was for entertainment purposes. Now, the people whipping them were doing it to teach a lesson. But it's okay. You guys can go. No, I'm taping this way. You can go ahead. Okay. But the people who came to watch would watch for entertainment purposes. And yeah, that's incredibly sick, but that's exactly what happened. And so the second part is about kids, and it was, of course, very, very hard to stomach, but you gotta learn it, right? When the slave traders brought the slaves, and there was a lot of domestic slave trading after slave trading was banned from Africa. And they would clean up the slaves. So they would travel from one state to another. The traders would bring them in shackles, and then they wanted them to get healthy, so they would feed them better before bringing them to the market, because they're trying to get as high a price as possible. The prices ranged back then from $50 to someone who was 60 years old, $100 for a 1-year-old, to the best was 20-year-olds. These are on average, and in particular, and of course it depended on your trade and depended on a lot of different things. But the 20-year-olds would get $900. You get $900 for a 20-year-old. Now, in today's prices, the best males that were in the best shape, had the best skills, would trade for about $38,000. So again, on average, to give you a sense of it. But they would clean up the slaves. before they would trim their beards, they would pluck the gray out of their hair. But the two things that really struck me were one, they would have them dance, and you think, that's interesting. Now, sometimes the slaves who were bought were made to dance for entertainment purposes later by their owners, but in this case, they were made to dance and exercise so they can get in good shape before they went to sail. And then they would oil up their skin so that they looked like they were in good shape before the sail. But the one that really grabbed me by the heart was the young girls. They would oil their hair and sometimes braid their hair to make sure the girls looked as good as possible. And if you're a decent human being, it's impossible for that not to be heart-wrenching. And so come and find out. And history is sometimes amazing and wonderful, and sometimes it is horrific. But nonetheless, it is true. And we have to learn from it so that we don't repeat it. Not that I think we're going to reopen slavery, but that wound up affecting things. So now, finally, to how did it affect things? Now, look, the slave owners would say of the blacks that they are lazy, that they are less intelligent, and that they are promiscuous. So let's just break that down real quick. Now, the guys who didn't want to work and would enslave people so they wouldn't have to work themselves called the slaves lazy, who they forced to work. It was literally called forced labor. I mean, the irony of that stereotype is stunning. And the fact that the country has not gotten away from that stereotype, as I see today and I hear today from racists, unfortunately, far too many in this country, calling blacks lazy, it is unbelievable. They're not the ones who enslaved others, they're the ones who were forced into labor. And by the way, how hardworking would you be if you were forced into labor for someone else and not for your own benefit? Secondly, they said, they're less intelligent. Well, they were actually banned from learning. It was illegal to teach blacks anything in this country, including reading and writing. And second of all, they sometimes, as it is explained in the museum behind me, the slaves would pretend to be less intelligent so they would get less work. Now, if they thought you were really bright and could get a lot done, they'd give you more work. Well, you didn't want more work because it wasn't your work. You gained nothing from it. All you got was more hard work. And now, finally, promiscuous. The irony of slave owners who continually rape their slaves, calling the slaves promiscuous, is beyond comprehension and imagination. But those parts of history rain down on us today. That's why I tell you these stories. They're not pleasant stories, they're horrific stories. But we've got to know it so we can fix it. So if you've never been to one of these museums, and I've been to them now all across the country, in Alabama, in Tennessee, and here in Charleston, please go. It is amazing. It is interesting. You learn from it. And it is not easy, and it is not comfortable. But we've got to get a little uncomfortable so we can get to the truth and get to what matters and fix things. Thank you, guys.